Away from that, now U.S. President Donald Trump will host South Africa's leader at the White House today for a meeting few months after President Trump accused the country's government of allowing a genocide to take place against minority white farmers. South Africa strongly rejected this allegation, prompting President Cyril Ramaphosa to push for a meeting with Mr. Trump in an attempt to salvage his country's relationship with the United States, which is at its lowest point since the end of the apartheid system of racial segregation in 1994. President Ramaphosa said he hopes to correct what he calls damaging mischaracterizations during the meeting, which is President Trump's first with an African leader at the White House since he returned to office. In advance of the meeting, a White House official said President Trump's topics of discussion with his South African counterpart were likely to include the need to condemn politicians who promote genocidal rhetoric and to classify farm attacks as a priority crime. Chairman Influence Africa Johannesburg, Tagwa Gbazwe, joins me for more on this discussion via Zoom. Good to have you join us on World Now. First, what are your expectations from this meeting? Do you suppose that President Ramaphosa will be able to correct what he called damaging mischaracterizations during the meeting?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, viewers. It's my pleasure to join you today on this interesting discussions. Well, I would expect maybe today's meeting between the two presidents to perhaps be a little bit tense, but will provide an opportunity for the South African president to correct and clarify some misconceptions, that has been shown from the American government. The question is, what the two parties will agree coming out from that meeting. There's been a lot of tense relations between the two countries, part of which stems from, the number of factors. Firstly, there's the issue around South Africa's role in taking Israel to the International Criminal Court of Justice, and you understand the proximity or the closeness or close ties between the U.S. and Israel. So a number of commentators are saying, well, perhaps maybe this is a backlash. Also, there's also a lot of commentary on social media about perhaps the influence of Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa and has his certain perceptions around the transition and so-called treatment of white people. But I'm not expecting to have a public bashing of the South African president. Remember, the South African president currently holds the G20 presidency or chairmanship. So I think that it would be an interesting meeting where both parties can actually kind of like maybe perhaps put their cards on the table.
Mr. Gbazwe,
and it will be very interesting to see what what the American president takes home at the end of today's meeting.
Yes, and of course also what President Ramaphosa takes home. When you mentioned earlier that you expect this to be tense, I was just flashing my mind back to that interaction between President Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky. Is that the level of tense you're looking at here, or something milder?
Well, could be a bit tense, but I expect the South African president to hold his own. South Africa is by no means a pushover country. Also having taken cognizance of the fact that Ramaphosa holds the G20 presidency by virtue of being the South African president. So I think that I expect, despite I expect that despite the tensions, that there would be a cordial engagement
All
between
right.
the parties.
All right. But as it stands, the U.S. actually says it feels there is evidence to support its genocide allegation in South Africa. So how easily do you think, that conviction can be corrected by the president?
Well, I think the facts are there. Um, you have two economies in South Africa, effectively. The primary economy, which is controlled by your white population or your previously advantaged, historically advantaged populations. And then on the other hand, you have your secondary economy, in which a large number of your previously historically disadvantaged communities are still trapped within the secondary economy. Um, the country has been since 1994. The country has had a number of progressive and sometimes controversial um, policies that are geared towards creating a balance, easing your historically disadvantaged communities into the economy. You've had your affirmative action, your broad-based Black economic empowerment initiatives and the like. So you also have difficult conversations about land, because you have a situation where your white population with say about 12% of the total population in the country controls about 75%
All
of
right.
privately owned farmland. And that's hectic. There are instances where one white family might be owning close to 1,400 to 1,000 hectares, when
Okay.
some Black families have no land at all, to be part of the means of production, to be part of production.
I hear you.
So I think those facts are there. I think there's certain areas I hear this, a lot of rhetoric around the song "Kill the Farmer, Shoot the Boer," which I don't know how the Constitutional Court in South Africa um, returned a verdict that that's not hate speech. That song is very uncomfortable for our white population here.
All right.
So I would expect that perhaps there would be pressure to deal with some of those. But the reality is, South Africa is a rainbow nation. The
All right,
Constitution
Mr.
states that this
Agbaze.
country belongs to all those that reside within it.
Okay, okay then. And before now, many had actually hailed President. Yes, I was saying that before now, many had hailed President Ramaphosa over his initial stance, speaking up in defense of his country. How might he now be seen and perhaps judged by those admirers who had praised him for his guts?
Sorry, your line is a bit faint. You said, how might he be?
How might he be perceived, seen, or judged by people who had initially praised him for his quite hard stance against the allegations coming from President Trump?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you quite clearly, but I think certainly the president is indeed, some of his foreign policies have not been have been seen by various quarters with have received mixed feelings from different quarters. Like, for instance, the matter of taking Israel to the International Criminal Court of Justice. Yes, this, because of the difficult history of apartheid and segregation that South Africa has been through, the South African government is very sympathetic to countries or people who they may perceive as facing such similar situations. Yes, but we've got a whole lot of issues facing Africa at the moment, from crisis and tension in the DRC and Sudan. I think I would think that we have more to gain by being perhaps more visibly involved in those conversations here around Africa. And let's leave the issues around Israel and Gaza to your to your Middle Eastern states, including some of our own African countries in some of our countries, African countries in North Africa, for them to take that leadership. I'm not sure that's South Africa's major cup of tea, but I think um, that Ramaphosa. I really like the rhetoric from the president in terms of talking of taking a strong stance in terms of this is South Africa, this is our country. We have that sovereignty, and we're dealing with some what do you call it, like transitional issues,
All right.
especially how do we redress the imbalances, the historical imbalances of the past.
All right, then. Chairman, Influence Africa, Johannesburg, Tagbo Agbazwe. Thank you very much for your time on World Now.
Be able to
all right.